So you all know that having a rock solid lease can make all the difference when it comes to dealing with issues with your tenant, right? Well, we did a video like this a while back with lease clauses that were suggestions that you can use to incorporate into your lease to make it much more specific and clear and just overall that for you to have a better lease. Well, we got so many interested people and so many responses that we thought we would do another video just like that, kind of part 2, and tell you about some other clauses that we incorporate into our lease that we think could help you have a rock solid lease too. So if you like information like this, and if you're a landlord and you want tips and information, then I hope you'll subscribe to our channel because we put out videos each and every week. Now, it's really important that you review and edit your lease on a regular basis so that it doesn't get outdated and stale. I'm Sue Richey, for those of you that don't know me, and I own a residential property management company, and that's one of the things that we do pretty much on an annual basis. Situations come up, weird things come up, and then we realize, oh, we really should include that in our lease. So it's a constant editing process and updating, and it's really important to do that because it's never actually ever really done. So by the end of this video, I'm going to give you 6 more lease clauses that you can hopefully use in your lease and as you continue to update yours. So let's get to them. First one is regarding a holdover tenant. A holdover tenant is just someone who stays past the end of their lease. So let's say the lease ends and you just, for whatever reason, they're not getting out and they're also not paying you. So you want to make sure that you have some kind of very clear clause in your lease that says, if you stay beyond the date you're supposed to, this is what you'll pay. And you can do it on a daily rate. You can just whatever you want to do, but a daily rate is probably a good idea because obviously the longer they stay, they have to pay. And this will encourage them to just get out. But you want to make sure you have something like that because we've encountered some situations like that recently. And having something like this clause made it easy then to say, well, you owe us this much, you can take it from the security deposit and be done. And it's super clear. Okay, clause number 2 is about subleases. Now, we get a lot of roommate type situations. We have some properties that are located near a local university and we have a lot of roommates and they change from time to time. Our lease does not allow subleasing. So there are a couple things you want to consider when you're looking at subleasing, and we are going to do some future videos in more detail about this because I think this is a really important topic. But basically when you sublease a property, the person that, or when a tenant subleases, that person that they're subleasing to is paying the rent to the original tenant, and they're basically transferring their tenancy rights to that person. The first tenant still owes you the money, but the second one is paying them. So there's like kind of 2 people in this scenario. What we prefer to do is to switch out the tenant completely and write a new lease, because when you have, we want the person who's living in the property to actually be on the lease and be responsible. So what we do is we have the new person apply, do an application, we approve them, and then they pay a fee to us to basically we have to rewrite the lease. But it makes it super clear who's in there, who's responsible, and we don't have any questions. That's our preference. There are some other advantages to a sublease and you could do them. And again, we'll go through that in a future video, but it's important that you at least define whether you allow a sublease or you don't allow a sublease. That's really the key point here. The third lease clause I want to tell you about today is about an early termination clause. So in an early termination, we're seeing a lot more of this actually in the current environment with COVID. We've had people, wanting to end their leases early. Or when it's a super hot buyer's market, you have a lot of tenants who are buying homes and they might just find the perfect home and want to end their lease early. It's really important that you spell out exactly what the terms are if they want to end early. So for example, you want to consider having just a simple lease break fee. We have that in our lease. But in addition, if a tenant ends a lease early, it's going to cost the owner money. So they're going to have to pay remarketing fees and leasing fees because now the owner is having to relist the property earlier than they had anticipated doing that. So the way our lease works is if the if the tenant is in the property less than 6 months, they're paying the full leasing fee. If they're in there more than 6 months, then they're paying a prorated portion, probably half or a prorated depending on how long they stay. So it's just really kind of what the timing is, but still they're paying something because now they're ending early and the owner is incurring additional expense. So whatever you decide to do, first of all, make sure that legally you can charge what you want to charge, but spell it out really clear so you can always refer back to it when the tenant says, hey, can I break my lease? What will it cost? Go, hey, in paragraph 9, this is exactly what it's going to cost you, and then they can make a decision whether they want to end or not. The fourth clause is really defining what is late rent. This gets a little bit confusing because in a lot of leases, you'll have the date when the rent is due, but then typically you'll have some sort of a grace period. And so there's a lot of gray area as to when you would charge a late fee. So for example, our leases all begin, or the rent is due on the first of the month. And that's after the first, that's actually when it's considered late. However, we do have a 3-day grace period. So by midnight on that third day, that's when we will, if we don't receive the rent by midnight on that third day, that's when we'll impose the late fee. Now, it's also important that you clearly define what that late fee is. Is it a percentage of the rent? Is it just a flat fee? Whatever it is, just make sure it's super clear. You can also have additional fees if you have to go through eviction and so on, but those are separate. And again, important to clearly identify what they are. Make sure though that you check with your jurisdiction, what's typical in your area or your laws as to what you can charge. Because if you charge something that's really high, it may never hold up in court. So it's not really worth it. Just look at what's customary and do that, but just spell it out. Another clause number 5, is abandoning property. So let's say your tenant moves out and they leave behind a bunch of stuff. Well, technically they've abandoned it. There is a time period in our lease, it's 14 days. We have the right to take that stuff, move it somewhere else, and hang on to it for 14 days. If they come back and they say, okay, this is mine, I'm gonna come back and get it, they get it in that 14 days, that's fine. After that time period, we have the right to dispose of it however we see fit. And at that point, it's considered abandoned. So they can't come back later and say, hey, where's my stuff? You know, and then you be responsible. You've made it super clear in there that they left it behind, they had this much time to get it, and now it's too late. So you're off the hook. And the last clause I would talk about today is related to insurance. I talk about insurance in a number of different videos. It's a very important topic when it comes to rental property. Make sure in your lease that you spell out exactly what you want the tenant to have. Our leases require all tenants must show proof that they have a renter's insurance policy that covers all of their belongings in the property, and we require that before they move in. In addition, you can also spell out what's required by the landlord. So for a landlord, you want to make sure you talk to your insurance company that you have a landlord policy and you have adequate coverage. So just spell out what you want the tenant to have and make it really clear, because it's really important for them. A lot of tenants don't realize what it covers, and some of them also cover additional liability. So just be super clear about that too. Okay, so there you go. There's 6 new lease clauses that you might want to think about incorporating into your lease to make it really, really clear. The more clear the lease, the better it is, the less problems you have later. I've also put a link to renter's insurance resources in the notes below, and I've also put a link to a guide to the addendum and the lease clauses that I talked about today. So I hope this video was helpful for you. This is a big part of being a landlord, is having a really good lease, like I said. And so I hope you share this with other landlords and come back and subscribe to our channel, and I'll see you next time.